We're all from the class of 13 who helped pull this together, but actually it was Katie and Alice and Beth and the MHCDS folks who really did the heavy lifting. But thank you. So Will Furness, Barb Barnett, and Yasmin Winkler, and we're happy to be here, and we're really, really happy that you're here. I just wanted to make a few comments about the genesis of this conference. I remember running in during the summer of, while we were still in class, and talking to Katie about the fact we need to preserve this somehow after we leave. We have to have some kind of a conference that goes on because MHCDS program has to go on in perpetuity. At the time, I think I talked to you about making it sort of like a Gordon conference where we come up and we focus on one specific item in healthcare delivery that we need to change. But I think several other people had the same idea, including the people up on the podium and many in our class, about doing a symposium yearly, and it sort of morphed into this more open tent forum, which is really awesome. And so the reason for this conference, I think, is because we want this experience of MHCS to live on. We'd like the Dartmouth to become the center of the universe for healthcare delivery science. It already is, actually. I know you hate hearing about that, Elliot, but you know, we still want this to be the center of the universe. No, I'm just kidding. Frankly, we'd like to build a community of experts in healthcare delivery and provide a forum of exchange for ideas and innovating and sharing our own experiences, and for us in the program to come back and recharge every year, which we really need. We talked about that today. To reinforce the things that we learn, to learn new things from each other, from the other classes up and down, and from the other folks in this room who are going to create this experience tomorrow that we're going to have. We also wanted to provide that opportunity for others in the room and others attending the conference to sort of have a glimpse into our world of MHCDS and gain some insight into some of the things that we've learned in our program and since then. And probably equally important is to learn from our peers who attend this meeting. So this was originally envisioned as a gift from the class of 2013. I should say that this year's program is a gift from 2013 with some again some additional funding from. Remind me. You're going to do that. I'll stop then. Okay. So sorry. But the point is that moving forward, we all want everybody to have ownership here, 2013 and future classes and all attendees who are in this room. And we gain our strength by participation, collaboration. We want to grow this. We want to nurture it and have it go on in perpetuity. So Yaz is going to talk about what's going to happen over the next 24 hours.
Oh, okay. But let's not talk about what happens after this. Directly, right? I know how this group works. So welcome everybody. And in terms of what Ken had to say and what we really wanted to accomplish was really kind of to touch base with each other with regards to the changing landscape of the healthcare delivery system and how would we continue to learn from each other as we're all being touched or touch and intersect with that system in a whole variety of ways from all of the various areas and entities that we come from. So hopefully you will be feeling really challenged and scintillated and hope that it's a thought-provoking agenda that we put together for you for tomorrow, which incorporates thinking about the new delivery models and what does that really mean? What does that look like? How is it going to deliver medicine in a different way? And then how do we actually compensate those new delivery models as well? So making sure that the reimbursement aspect of that is something that's commensurate with what's being delivered through those models. And thinking about technology and how that helps us to further that how we are efficient and effective in terms of what we do every day, and how that really intersects with the healthcare delivery system as well. And then we're going to hear from the C-suite, which I think will be really an important conversation for all of us to to have with folks that lead many of the folks that are actually in this room and outside in terms of how, with this changing landscape, how do you actually survive all of that change and lead through change and the kinds of real challenges that you face as a result of that. And then we'll do a wrap up in terms of, so what did we hear? What did we learn? What did we think was really intriguing? And what are we curious about that we want to know more about as we move forward? So I'm going to turn it over to Will.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, and actually I just want to add on to what Ken was saying. So we were talking earlier about, what are we hoping the guests are going to gain from this? And I really wish we would have changed the invitation and not say guest and say something like combatant or active participant. So this is really not a class project. We want this to be open to the community. We're really hoping you guys are going to challenge the moderators tomorrow, ask a lot of questions. Don't sit back and expect that all the students are going to do the work. We want you guys to be part of this conversation.
So I've been given the great privilege and honor to introduce an accomplished, talented, dedicated educator who has become my role model, Katie Milligan. Katie received her PhD in comparative literature from the University of Pennsylvania. She received her MBA from Tuck. As many of you in this room know, she has been the director of the Master of Healthcare Delivery Science program since its founding in 2010. Katie somehow miraculously brought the Tuck School of Business, the Dartmouth Institute of Health Policy, and the Clinical Practice TDI together to collaborate and to create our curriculum. She didn't stop there. Every year she listened to what we had to say, what we as a class had to offer, and she modified the curriculum so this would be the best possible program it could be. Over the last 3 years, Katie has worn many hats. Katie has been our den mother, camp counselor, therapist, mentor, as well as the shipping coordinator. For those of you who might not know, I think Yaz and Monica bought out Amazon.com in terms of all their linen, and Katie somehow coordinated that. She is the heart and soul of this program. She is our lifeline, and without her, we would not be here today. So, Katie, the classes of 2013, 14, and 15 got together, and we wanted to get you a gift, a small token. But not just any gift. We wanted a gift that would represent how much this program has grown over the last 3 years. And with that being said, I'd like to present you with a Hanover Inn bath mat.
Yeah, they don't know the story.
Okay, I get to tell the story, I guess. So, I don't know if I can do this story justice. We've learned a lot in putting this program on. And one thing we learned was about the preferences of a group of, 40 or 50-somethings in terms of their housing. They like to have their own bathrooms. They don't like to share bathrooms with other people. We put, in the first year that the students were on campus, we put some of the students into an undergraduate dorm. And then we listened to their feedback. And and so actually at the end of that first residential, there was a lot of actual camaraderie developed around, I think, that dorm experience. And at the end of that residential session, one of the funny things was in the dorm, you got a very nice paper bath mat. And so they presented us with a framed, signed bath mat, which is still in my office. I still have the bath mat in my office. Anyway, thank you, Barb, for that introduction. That was, it was too much, really, in many ways. And I also want to just thank the foursome of you, Yaz and Will and Ken and Barb, for everything you've done this year as we've brought this symposium to fruition. You've been the steering committee, the sounding board, and the backstop for all our crazy ideas, and it's really been invaluable to be working with you. I'm very pleased tonight to actually officially welcome you to the first of what we think will be, intend, plan, hope, will be the first annual Dartmouth Symposium on Healthcare Delivery Science. And the theme for this year is Leading Change in Healthcare Delivery. As Ken explained to you a little bit, this symposium was the brainchild of this first graduating class, the class of 2013. And they considered it their gift to us and to subsequent classes of students. They told us as their program was drawing to a close that they actually didn't want to graduate. Well, sort of. I mean, they were, they were happy to have their 15 hours a week back, but they didn't want to leave each other, and they didn't want to leave us, and we were glad because we didn't want them to leave either. And so this is our compromise, that once a year they get to come back, and everyone gets to come back and see each other again and be together again and talk about what brought us all together in the first place, the aspiration to make healthcare delivery better, both in the United States and around the world. And we're very eager and excited to be opening the symposium to a more general audience as well, and trying to share that passion with other people who also have it. So we also received additional funding for this year's symposium from the Cogswell Benevolent Trust, which we appreciate very much. Their interest is in improving healthcare in New Hampshire, and it is thanks to their generosity that we're able to welcome to the symposium a number of leaders from New Hampshire hospitals and community mental health centers. I'm also very pleased this evening to be able to announce publicly the Bonnie L. Curran Memorial Fund, which will support the next 3 years of the symposium from 2015 to 2017. We here at MHCDS consider our students to be our co-creators in our ambitious plan to build the field of healthcare delivery and to use it, we say in all sincerity, to change the world. And within this very special group of people, Bonnie Curran, MHCDS 13, had a special impact. Her curiosity, enthusiasm, and energy inspired her classmates, and it inspired us. Having Bonnie in the inaugural class made a lasting impact on the formation of the program. We are profoundly honored that her husband, Peter, who is also an MHCDS 13, chose to establish the Memorial Fund, and that so many members of the MHCDS community have contributed to it. And now it is my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker for this evening, Mick Cornett, the mayor of Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. As we thought with the steering committee about who we should invite for a keynote speaker, we first thought of the symposium theme, Leading Change in Healthcare Delivery. And in the spirit of the learning that we do here, we thought it would be ideal if we could find a live case study, an example of an audacious population health endeavor, and the perspective of the leadership who pulled it off. For all of these reasons, we're delighted to have Mick Cornett with us here tonight. Best known to some for bringing the NBA to Oklahoma City, and to others for famously putting the entire city on a diet, Mayor Cornett has also guided Oklahoma City to being one of the nation's most robust economies. The unemployment rate in Oklahoma City has been the nation's lowest. The city's population is growing at twice its historic rate. And the Kauffman Foundation called Oklahoma City the most entrepreneurial city in the country with the most startups per capita. Mayor Cornett has been recognized by state, national, and international organizations for his accomplishments in Oklahoma City. His growing list of individual awards and honors include nods for urban design, health, sports, and the arts. In September, he was named the state of Oklahoma's Mayor of the Year. Newsweek named him one of America's 5 most innovative mayors in 2012. Governing magazine named him the 2010 Public Official of the Year. And the London-based World Mayors Organization declared him the second best mayor in the world in 2010, second only to the mayor of Mexico City. Mayor Cornett speaks nationally on the topics of healthy communities, urban design, walkable cities, and placemaking. He has a degree in journalism from the University of Oklahoma and an MBA from New York University. And with all these accomplishments, Mayor Cornett recently became, in fact, just 3 weeks ago, I think, the first mayor in the history of Oklahoma City to be elected to a 4th term. So please help me welcome Mick Cornett.
Thank you. I thought she was going to hand me that towel, and I wasn't going to know what to do with it. It is great to be here with all of you. Now, how many of you have been to Oklahoma City? Okay, how many of you have not and have no idea who I am? That's what I figured. Well, let me give you a little bit of a history lesson. You have heard the saying, no doubt, that Rome was not built in a day. Well, we were. Literally. In the spring of 1889, the federal government decided it was going to have a land run. They were going to settle Indian territory by lining up the settlers and firing off a gun, and the settlers would roar across the countryside and put a stake in the ground. And wherever that stake was placed, that was their new home. The population of Oklahoma City went from 0 to 10,000 in one day. And our planning department is still paying for that. This was amongst the worst ideas the federal government ever had. The idea that you could possibly populate an entire city in one day somehow made sense in Washington, but made no sense in the plains of Oklahoma, where you could imagine the calamity at the land office when multiple claimants came in for almost every piece of property. In this anarchy, the citizens got together and elected a mayor. And then they shot him. Yeah. You know, that's not really that funny, but it allows me to see what type of audience I'm dealing with, so I appreciate the feedback. 20th century comes along and Oklahoma City's population booms. Between 1900 and 1910, the population goes from 10,000 to 90,000. And when you look at Oklahoma City in the 20th century, it's that boom and bust cycle that never ended. When you have an economy that's based on commodities, you have cyclical times. And that was Oklahoma City's story, whether it was the price of cotton or the price of wheat, and ultimately the price of oil and natural gas. Oklahoma's economy has almost always gone like this. And our city's history has seen these similar lines. But along the way, we have been a city of innovation. The shopping cart, invented in Oklahoma City. The parking meter. You're welcome. In the 1970s, when I was coming of age, it was one of the good times. The price of oil, the price of natural gas was starting to escalate. In fact, if you're old enough to remember the culture of the day, there was one acknowledged fact, and that is we were running out of fossil fuels. The president started wearing a sweater around the White House. He was talking about conservation, how we had to preserve these precious reserves that were fossil fuels. And if you're in Oklahoma and you're understanding supply and demand, you're thinking to yourself, this is really, really good because we've got supply and there is demand. And so our local economy was going up and up and up. And if you were in Oklahoma City in the late 1970s and into 1980, it was a boom time generation like none other. And we were convinced it would last forever. And then it didn't. And it didn't end on one particular day, but it kind of felt like it. July 5th, 1982, we had a bank fail. And that was kind of new. You know, banks didn't fail in the 1980s. It hadn't failed since the 1930s. But before the decade was over 100 banks had failed in the state of Oklahoma. And so that booming economy of the 1970s led us to desperate times in the 1980s. Our energy industry was almost non-existent. Our banking industry was in shambles. And as a result, our commercial real estate industry had bottomed out. You can imagine an economy with none of those market sectors thriving. And it got worse in 1983, and then worse still in 84, and we knew 85 would be better, but it wasn't. And 86 got worse, and 87 got worse, and you get the idea. It was by the end of the decade that Oklahoma City probably had the worst economy in the United States. But about that time, we elected a pro-business mayor named Ron Norick. Now, Ron Norick came to the office and said, my priority is to create jobs. And so his first instinct was to go out and try to find whatever economic development opportunities existed and to go out and pursue them, to bring those jobs to Oklahoma City. Well, as luck would have it, or at least it seemed like luck at the time, United Airlines was trying to place a large maintenance facility somewhere in the country. It was 5,000 to 8,000 jobs, an annual economic impact of nearly $1 billion, and Oklahoma City was determined that we were going to get it. And so we started putting incentives on the table, and we passed a sales tax contingent on United coming. And bottom line, we were pretty much ready to build United this facility if they would just bring the jobs to Oklahoma City. These higher paying blue collar jobs that we prized so much that we knew would be the catalyst to turning our economy around. And so you can imagine with this incredible incentive package on the place, Oklahoma City starts rising on the list of cities that are pursuing this opportunity. And lo and behold, on a now fateful day in Oklahoma City's history, the CEO of United called a press conference and said, we're going to build this facility in Indianapolis. The mayor of Oklahoma City did a couple of very proactive things at that point. First of all, he insisted that United level with us and tell us what we did wrong. Where did we go wrong? And the CEO of United didn't really want to talk about it. There was no reason to create hard feelings now. And so he said only complimentary things. You were the best organized. You were the best prepared. You were the most polite. We loved working with your people. At the end of the day, we just chose somebody else. But Mayor Norick persisted. And what he finally pulled out of United Airlines was this startling information that unbeknownst to Oklahoma City, they had sent some mid-level executives and their spouses in to spend a weekend in Oklahoma City. And when they reported back, United came to the conclusion that they could not imagine their employees living there. And that was the kick in the teeth that Mayor Norick needed to hear. He did the next proactive thing. He went to Indianapolis. Now, he did not move there. Although at this stage of his political career, it must have seemed like a good idea. But what he saw in Indianapolis was a city that had invested in itself. They had a nightlife. They had professional sports arenas and teams. They had water features downtowns and restaurants, and people actually lived in the urban core. And Mayor Norick realized that there'd been a paradigm shift in the American economy. Indianapolis was one of the first to see it. And that was that no longer were people going to where the jobs were going to where the people were. That if you could create a city where people wanted to live, jobs would go to where the people wanted to be. The people with choices, the highly educated 20-somethings that every city pursues. And so he came back and with this innovative idea, with that same penny on the dollar sales tax that he had pitched to lure United, he came up with what's known as MAPS, the Metropolitan Area Projects. And it was very simple, a penny on the dollar sales tax for 5 years, and he was going to build 9 things. And it was things like a new library, put some money into our Performing Arts Center. There was a transportation element. There was some improvements at the fairgrounds. There was a new ballpark, a new sports arena. Mayor Norick even had the audacity to suggest that we should put water in the river. Now, I know what you're thinking, because probably you come from a city that has water in its river. But in Oklahoma City, that was not the case. You see, the river that our city was founded upon back in 1889 started flooding in the 20th century. And in 1923, it flooded once in the spring and once in the fall. And our city leaders went to the Corps of Engineers and said, you've got to help us. You've got to make sure this river never floods again. And they did. They took all the water out of our river and diverted it somewhere else. And so my generation grew up with this big ditch downtown that the grown-ups called the river. And I would go and look in my geography books in elementary school, and I'd see these beautiful rivers all over the world. And then I'd look at ours, and I wondered, what happened? The city of Oklahoma City actually had a line item in its budget to mow the river twice a year. Mayor Norrick's idea was to build some low-water dams and impound water. And at least we'd have water in the river. He also built a canal through an old warehouse district that he hoped would become an entertainment district someday. And so the citizens go to the polls, and despite all of the efforts, maps barely passed, 53%. Today, though, it's hard to find anyone who will admit they voted against it, because ultimately it would change everything. But you should be reminded that it didn't change everything immediately. This idea that the city wouldn't incur any debt and would pay cash for all these projects and sort of a pay-as-you-go philosophy was kind of new. There was no track record for how that would work. And Mayor Norrick had overpromised how quickly he could get the projects out of the ground. He had also underestimated how much the projects would cost. And so MAPS was immediately over budget and missing deadlines, and more controversial than ever in the months and immediate years following. In fact, a year or two later, I'm convinced if the citizens could have voted again, they would have changed their mind and voted it back out. And at that particular time in our city's history, when we'd been through the economic collapse, when we had been offered this opportunity for a strong future, but only to see it kind of bubble away in controversy, at this particular point in time, we're struck with the largest act of domestic terrorism in United States history. Bomb goes off downtown. 168 people are murdered in an office building at 9 o'clock on a weekday morning. And so I think it's important to kind of take a time capsule and take a snapshot of Oklahoma City at this particular point. The economic times of this generation, well documented, and now the emotional burden of the Oklahoma City bombing. And it's almost as if in the wake of the bombing, after so many hard times had been placed upon this generation, we reached down and grabbed hands and pulled each other up and dared the world to pull us apart again. The city became more united than any city that I can imagine, any city that I can name. The amount of pride that ultimately came out of that time frame in our history is magical. The MAPS projects finally started opening up, and the pride actually meant something, and tourism started coming, and you actually had a reason to invite family and friends from other parts of the country to come see Oklahoma City. And the quality of life that Mayor Norrick was promising, you could see it was starting to develop. Mayor Norrick leaves office, the next mayor comes in, and immediately sees that although we've made these nice investments downtown, he doesn't see a repopulation of the inner city. You see, most of Oklahoma City had by this time moved to the suburbs. And the mayor realized that we could pave those streets with gold in the inner city, but unless we did something about the image of our schools, people weren't going to repopulate downtown. And so he came up with an idea of MAPS for kids, a very creative, some act of political genius, penny on the dollar sales tax for 7 years to rebuild or refurbish every single building in the inner city district. All 75 buildings, either built, refurbished, or built anew. It also included new buses. It also included new technology. An incredibly creative way for the city to put its arms around that inner city district and say, look, this city isn't going anywhere unless we do something about the image of the school district. Interestingly, since I'm in New England, I'll throw in this tidbit. Cities from all over the world have come in and tried to emulate something about MAPS for kids and the way the city got together and rebuilt the schools. My understanding is the only city that's come close is New Haven, Connecticut, to come in with a similar type proposal to try and rebuild their school system, much smaller, but nonetheless a very similar type funding program in place to bail out a district that didn't seem to have any future on its own. And then in 2004, in kind of a rare act of collective misjudgment, the citizens elected me. Now, the city that I inherited from my illustrious predecessors was just starting to percolate with an economy. And you know what happens when you start rising above your peer cities? You start showing up on the lists. Magazines, websites, they love to rank cities. And all of a sudden, Oklahoma City was getting ranked. Best place to start a business, we're on the list. Best place to get a job, we're on the list. Now, we weren't near the top at that time on any of the lists, but we were at least mentioned. We'd never been mentioned on a list before, at least not anything positive. And so I was out talking to groups in town, trying to build civic pride, and I was using all these lists for validation about how we were emerging as a world-class city. And then came the list of the most obese cities in the country. And there we were. Now, I like to point out that we were on that list with a lot of really cool places. Dallas, Houston, New Orleans, Miami, Atlanta. These are not cities that you're typically embarrassed to be associated with. But who wants to be on the list of the most obese cities in the country? I also thought it was interesting. Typically, when you're placed on one of those negative lists, one of the lists that you don't want to be on, there's all sorts of denial at the leadership level. Business leaders, elected leaders, they all start to discredit the formulas by which the numbers were calculated, or they discredit the messenger, or somehow they prove it's a little inaccurate or a little misleading and they have some sort of spin to them. When we were placed on the list of the most obese cities in the country, we looked at each other and went, I bet that's right. There was no denial anywhere in town. We were very, I guess, aware of it, but we didn't talk about it. And about that time, I got on the scales. And I weighed 218 pounds. And I went to this government-sponsored website, and I typed in my height, and I typed in my weight, and I hit enter. And it came back and said, obese. I thought, what a stupid website. I'm not obese. I would know if I was obese. And then I started to get honest about my really lifelong struggles with weight loss and obesity, especially as an adult. And I started examining this unflattering pattern that I had of I would gain about 2 or 3 pounds a year, and then about every 10 years, I'd take off 20 or 30 pounds. And then I'd repeat it and go again. And as a result, my closet had all these clothes that I couldn't wear. I could wear about 1/3 of it at any one time, and only I knew which 1/3 of it I could wear. And it all seemed so normal at the time I was going through it. So I decided I needed to lose weight. And I had done it so many times before, I knew I could do it. I was eating about 3,000 calories a day because everybody wants to feed the mayor. And the mayor was eating. And instead of gaining 2 or 3 pounds a year, I was 2 years into my term, I was gaining 10 pounds a year as mayor. And I realized if I was going to be mayor very long, I was going to be a very large mayor. And so I started taking off weight, 1 pound a week for about 40 weeks. But along the way, I started trying to examine the culture in Oklahoma City and as to why our particular community might have a problem with obesity. And so I started looking around. And I realized we had created an incredible quality of life if you happened to be a car. But if you happened to be a person, you were seemingly fighting the automobile at every turn. We had sprawled out into this incredible, giant metropolitan area. Our city limits are 620 square miles. We're basically the largest city in the United States, with about a third of that developed. Because we're so spread out and because we're blessed with a lot of interstate highways, we basically have no traffic congestion, which is a good thing, except that it means you can live 20 miles away and get to downtown in 20 minutes, and people did. Land prices are cheap, and that only fueled the fast food economy because a lot of their business models are built on cheap land. And so then we started zoning the city for this automobile-centric community. And we didn't require developers to build sidewalks in neighborhoods for decades. And as a result, we had built the most unfriendly place for pedestrians you can possibly imagine. We had incredibly wide streets. The street width had been determined back in 1889 because they needed to know how much room a horse and buggy needed to make a U-turn. And it's quite a ways, apparently. And so we were stuck with these streets that you would push the walk sign and then you would run to get across the street. There was no walking. You weren't going to make it unless you were running really fast to get across. And so as I'm examining our city's obesity issue, I also realized one other thing. Nobody's talking about it. It was like the taboo subject in town. And I realized it's because, we're nice people. And talking about obesity is kind of personal. It affects the way people look. And it's not nice to talk negatively about the way people look. And so our unannounced strategy to combat obesity was to ignore it. And we could see where that was getting it. And perhaps most importantly, we looked at our kids and we'd see that it wasn't going to go away on its own. And so as I'm coming through this age of recognition of the obesity issue and how large it is in Oklahoma City, I'm wanting to come up with some idea to address it. And I realized the first thing we need to do is to get a conversation going. We've got to talk about this as a community. We've got to raise the level of awareness. Because at its heart, I'm a job creator. I'm trying to create jobs. And I can only imagine if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm looking at Oklahoma City, I'm going to do a little bit of research. And I'm going to wonder, what are my healthcare costs going to be in that community? What's my absenteeism rate going to be in that community? If I'm really serious about being the job-creating mayor, how can I ignore healthcare and the image of our city being one of the most obese cities in the country? And so I partnered with a friend of mine who'd made a living in the healthcare community, and he agreed to put together a website, and I agreed to come out with a program that we would work it in partnership. And on December 31st of 2007, I went to the zoo and I stood in front of the elephants and I said, this city is going on a diet and we're going to lose 1 million pounds. And that's when all hell broke loose. A politician's instinct is to tell people what they want to hear. That's what we all do. And here I was telling everybody they needed to lose weight. And so there was all sorts of feedback. You can imagine the local reaction and then the national reaction, which is what I feared most. Here I am trying to help the city's image, and my fear was that the national media would make fun of us. They would say, that city is so fat, the mayor had to put them all on a diet. But fortunately, the national media took a completely different stance. The national media said, look, this is a problem almost everywhere, and this is a city that's trying to do something about it. And immediately I was able to do a lot of interviews locally, regionally, and nationally. In one particular day, I was on the Ellen DeGeneres show talking about the program, and 150,000 people went to our website. The website domain was thiscityisgoingonadiet.com. And on the website, people could sign up and pledge to lose weight. And then as they logged their weight, and then they would go back and log in their new weight, the website would chart their success and kind of give them a graph. It also had a lot of educational information. It would talk about fitness opportunities, but it also, it tried to concentrate on food intake with healthier recipes, different ways to prepare foods, and different caloric information about what people might be eating but not knowing not knowing how many calories it might have. And the website was an instant sensation. People started going to the website, signing up, and all of a sudden, we had the conversation going that I thought we so desperately needed to have. Partially, I think, because I was willing to talk personally about my lifelong struggles with obesity. Suddenly, it seemed like people were more comfortable talking about it, even inside their own homes. Husbands and wives were talking about it and hopefully sharing that with their kids. Neighbors were talking about it over the backyard fence. Even if the only thing people said to one another at the water cooler was, "Did you hear what the crazy mayor did?" At least they were talking about the issue and starting to break down some of the blocks that had kept people from addressing this issue previously. Pastors started talking about it at church, and churches are wonderful ways to get people connected and to start some sort of weight loss opportunity. Businesses started addressing obesity in their own wellness programs. The large companies typically had great wellness programs already in place, but there was a tremendous opportunity in those medium-sized companies that really weren't doing anything about it. Now with our program, now with our website available, they were able to attach their program onto ours, and immediately people started adding it up. And thousands of people started coming on board. Well, lo and behold, it took us 4 years and 3 weeks, but in December of 2012, we reached the £1 million. And by then, 47,000 people had signed up. And I'll save you the math. I know it's an Ivy League school, but I don't want to make you do math. Over 20 pounds apiece for 47,000 people. But here, I think, is the opportunity that was created by the conversation, because it came an opportunity for another MAPS project, another penny on the dollar sales tax for the quality of life. And now that this conversation had taken place, we were able to start changing the built environment in Oklahoma City. And so in MAPS 3, along with your typical economic development drivers like a new convention center, we added a downtown streetcar to add to the pedestrian friendliness of the nature. We're building a downtown Central Park that's over 70 acres in size. It'll take us from the core of downtown all the way to the shore of the river that now has water in it. We're building senior health and wellness centers throughout the community. We're putting in hundreds of miles of sidewalks. We're going into developed neighborhoods that had been disconnected since they've been designed. We had neighborhoods and we had schools, but we had not created any sort of connection between them for sidewalks. We had libraries in neighborhoods, but we had not connected them with sidewalks. We're going back in now to these developed neighborhoods, and it can be very expensive to put sidewalks into developed neighborhoods, but we're putting hundreds of miles in to try and create a more pedestrian-friendly environment. We're completing our jogging and biking trail system. Years ago, during a meeting with staff, they were showing me our bicycle trail master plan. And I'm looking at it and I'm getting really excited, and there's some federal money that came in every year, and we would, do another leg of this plan. And I raised my hand and I said, at the rate we're going, when are we going to finish the bicycle trail master plan? And I realized we were all going to be dead before the bicycle trail master plan was completed. And so with MAPS 3, we put all of the funding in there to do it immediately. And so we'll have well over 100 miles of bicycle trails all through the community when it's completed. Through another funding source, we started redesigning all of the inner city streets. And so we took those really wide streets and we narrowed them. We heavily landscaped them. We put in bike paths and on-street parking to try and create a more pedestrian-friendly environment in the community. In 2012, when we reached the £1 million, there was obviously some level of media interest, and we had about, at least 10 people that had lost over 100 pounds each. And so the Rachel Ray Show invited me and those large weight losers, up to New York, where they were able to do an entire show around our program and interview these people and how their lives had been changed by this weight loss. And while I was in New York, I did a round of media. And I found myself in the lobby of Men's Fitness magazine. And that's when I remembered Men's Fitness was the magazine that had placed us on the list of the most obese cities in the country. And lo and behold, I'm in their lobby waiting for the reporter to come out and get me. And on the coffee table in the waiting room, the headline at the top said, "America's Fattest Cities. Do you live in one?" And so I picked it up because I knew I did. And the way they do it, they take the 50 largest cities in the country and they rate them. And so the 25 cities that perform the best are called the fittest cities, and they rank them. And then the 25 that don't perform well, they call them the fattest cities, and they rank them too. And so I go to the fattest cities list to see where we are this year, and I'm going down it, and I couldn't find it, so I went up, and I went back, and I must have gone up and down 5 times trying to find us, and I thought, can't be. And I turned the page, and we were on the list of the fittest cities in the country. We were number 22 on the fittest list according to Men's Fitness magazine. Now, how many of you in here read The Grapes of Wrath when you were in school? Now, see, that amazes me. I used to think that was something that we did in Oklahoma to ensure that our kids would feel bad about themselves. But apparently not. As I travel the country and ask for hands, hands go up all over the place. You know, this is not the most complimentary view of Oklahoma. But it's interesting, what we're seeing now by looking at Census Bureau statistics, it looks like we're seeing the wrath of grapes. In the 1930s, Steinbeck was chronicling Oklahomans who were getting on Route 66 with everything they had and heading west, heading for hope, heading for future, heading for a better tomorrow. And now the Census Bureau is showing us that the third generation is coming back to Oklahoma. Census Bureau reporting numbers of Californians moving to Oklahoma in much larger numbers than are going the other way. More people from Texas are moving to Oklahoma City than are going the other way. These demographic shifts are all back to what Mayor Norrick was trying to create. A city that could attract highly educated 20-somethings, knowing that the jobs would come. And we have had, over the last 4 years, the lowest unemployment rate in the United States, coming from the very bottom to the very top in that 25-year span. And I will close with this, and then I'll take questions if you have any. Whenever there's an initiative, and I'm my 4th term, so I've had a lot of initiatives through the years that I have asked the voters to support. And then I've had my own re-elections. And in almost every case, whether I'm pushing for some level of bond issue or sales tax, or I'm pushing me as a candidate, in every case, inevitably, I find myself 10 miles from downtown in a suburban neighborhood pleading with a guy to vote for me who doesn't want to. And I can almost count on 3 things. He doesn't like downtown, he doesn't like taxes, and he doesn't like me. And when I've lost the intellectual argument, when I explain to him that you cannot be a suburb of nothing, that you must invest in the inner city, when I've lost the intellectual argument, I close with this. I say, well, we're creating a city where your kid and grandkid are going to choose to live. And they hate that argument because they know it's true. You see, my generation left Oklahoma City. Anyone with an advanced degree that came of age in the 1980s couldn't find a job that measured up to their educational attainment. And today, they're in Boston or Detroit or Tokyo or Houston, but they're almost certainly not in Oklahoma City. Thousands of very talented young people who didn't leave Oklahoma City because they necessarily wanted to, but they had choices. Highly educated 20-somethings have choices, and they will leave. Oklahoma City is now winning that race for those highly educated young people who are driving this incredible economy we have now going in Oklahoma City and allowing those entrepreneurs to fuel what appears to be a very prosperous future. So Thank you all very much for being so attentive.
If there are questions for Mayor Cornett, we have a few microphones, so happy to.
Thank you very much for your talk. It's quite inspiring. I work in government, so I have to ask you, how do you get away with raising taxes and telling people what to do? That's my dream.
Yeah, I'm not very smart. Well, a couple of answers. First of all, you bring up a good point, because I live in one of the most conservative states in the country. There is not an elected Democrat in sight in Oklahoma. All 8 statewide officials are Republican. The mayors of the 2 largest cities are Republican. I'm a Republican. Legislature is dominated by Republicans. Not unanimous, but it's dominated by Republicans. And so, yeah, how in that conservative environment are citizens willing to tax themselves? And I think the best answer I can give you is, in our city, people have differentiated the type of taxation they are willing to accept and the type they're not willing to accept. And in our city, they seem to like capital projects that they can go up and touch. Also, all of these sales tax initiatives that I've talked about had a time limit to them. And so it's a penny on the dollar for a certain amount of years. The first one was 5, the next one was 7. The one we're currently in, MAPS 3, is 7 years and 9 months. And we have developed a reputation of doing what we said we were going to do. And again, we're not passing these things by astronomical numbers. MAPS 3 passed with 54% of the vote. I'm not suggesting that we do this easily. We haven't lost an election, though, since the bombing in 1995. And there is a sense of pride in Oklahoma City that probably has solidified our community more than others. We don't have a lot of finger pointing. In our community, the business community supports City Hall. So when you have a community where the mayor gets along with the city council and the business community can support City Hall, and you don't have a lot of people pointing fingers at each other and creating negativity, people kind of like the idea they don't have to be the referees for the leadership. There's a perception that we've had this opportunity to voice opinions, and now everybody's got to pull on the same rope. And negativity does nothing but fuel contempt for government, especially in local government. And in community after community where I will come in and talk and kind of see what's going on, in cities that just don't seem to be able to get much traction, typically there's some level of negativity going on, and there's a level of distrust. And we've been able to hang on in Oklahoma City with the majority of the citizens appreciating what we're doing. And at the same time, the Tea Party doesn't like me at all, but they have a tough time making an argument that what we're doing isn't working because the results are so astronomically good. So when they complain, they don't have a lot of followers.
When you look at that last part, have you seen a decrease in the rates of the cost of health insurance, or some sort of switch in the type of services that are delivered to the population? So it's not just losing weight. Have you seen an increase in health as an outcome?
Well, healthcare costs, continue to go up, and I don't want you to leave with the impression tonight that everyone looks like a supermodel in Oklahoma City. I do feel like we're doing better. I do feel like we've gotten a handle on the obesity effort, but I'm leery of anyone who thinks they can measure obesity with much exact science. I'm always leery of numbers and percentages. I don't know. It seems like we're doing better. What I do know is that our program was an awareness campaign, and it succeeded. If you talk about obesity in Oklahoma City, people know exactly what you're talking about. They have a lot more information they did before. They're aware of the program. They knew they were put on a diet by the mayor. The program succeeded on the penetration level. How much better we're doing, I can't necessarily tell you, but it feels like we've started a cultural shift in the community. And cultural shifts may take 10 or 20 years to pursue. You know, it's like turning a ship around in the middle of the ocean. It's not going to happen very fast. But I do feel like that as our per capita incomes go up, and they're rising fast, and the information about health and placing health is just a much higher priority in our community than it used to be, that we've become a community that values health much more than we did so 5 or 10 years ago. Thank you. You bet. Yes.
Hi, Mayor. I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska. I happen to be on the Planning and Zoning Commission there. You may know we've done a lot of revitalization in our core as well. And what we've seen in the last several years is we're having great success getting grocery stores into some of our newer areas, Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, but we're still having problems sort of in our core and in some of our more impoverished areas. And you had mentioned part of the wellness effort is getting the awareness of good eating. And so I was wondering if you have run into that challenge, how you've attracted businesses, or, you know, how do we crack that nut?
Yeah, the food desert. How do you get fresh fruits and vegetables in the neighborhoods that may not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables? And hiring grocery stores are typically one way we go after it. It's very tough to get the retail establishment to lead. I'm old enough to have been in math classes that had a compass, you know, where you put a little pencil in there and you drew a circle. Retailers still almost do that today. They want to know what's the per capita income and what's the density around that particular site. And you can't convince them that there are other metrics that they might want to consider. That's the only thing that apparently they can consider. And for those reasons, it's hard to get retailers to go into an area where the math just doesn't work. We have just recently announced, though, an incredibly proactive grocery store going into one of our impoverished areas. We had to do some funding along the way. We created a TIF area, so we'll be part of the subsidization of this development. But we feel like it's very, very important, and what it's costing us in healthcare costs is certainly going to be offset by the dollars that we put into the program. But getting retailers to do what you want instead of what they want is not impossible, but next to impossible. So I feel your pain. Yes?
Mayor, my name is Benjamin Anderson. I'm the CEO of a hospital in western Kansas, and our nearest Whole Foods is 4 hours away. And we are, if you look at our community health, it looks like Oklahoma City before, right? And our largest industry is beef packing. So how do you convince a community that needs to be heart healthier, whose largest industry is beef? Perhaps we need to look at a different way of living.
Well, you need partners. You need both a champion and partners. And in a lot of communities where I go speak, healthcare organizations and hospitals are trying to organize around it. Generally, in our case, you had the incredible shrinking mayor, and so I was losing weight throughout that time period and was kind of the centerpiece of it. It helps to have some sort of leadership at the top when you're trying to draw attention to it. We've also taken all the fried foods out of the schools and tried to, just kind of change the culture of what we're willing to accept. So those are some of the things that you can legislate in. You can also, just look at the number of fast food restaurants that might be available to your citizens or what food options they have available to them. But in our case, the first step was just a conversation. And if you don't feel like anybody's talking about it, you might attempt to talk to whatever media might be available in western Kansas, whether it's a radio station or newspapers, see if you can get a media partner involved in a healthcare organization, get a conversation going so people are at least more aware of it. It's hard to change until you can bring up the awareness.
So congratulations, Mayor. You answered my question in part. I was going to ask what's next. At the opposite end of the political spectrum, you've got Mayor Bloomberg in New York, who kind of went after soda and fast food in the schools, and then you've got folks like Toby Cosgrove at Cleveland Clinic, who removes all the fryers out of the health system. What's next? Where do you take this thing? How do you progress the agenda?
Well, First of all, let me distinguish between my approach and Mayor Bloomberg's approach. Mayor Bloomberg's approach was to try and legislate change, and you know, I don't have to tell this audience how we addressed it. I made a point to try and work with the private sector, and after I put the city on the diet, the restaurants reacted this way in Oklahoma City. Most of the chefs in town all wanted to prove they could have a healthy menu too, and so they all started having mayor's specials at lunch and started competing against each other in a sense. And the restaurant owners were telling me whatever was the mayor's special was the top seller of the day consistently. And this is another chapter of the story that I didn't get into, but your question reminds me that I probably should. When I was on the Ellen DeGeneres show, in the audience that day, by watching in television, was the CEO of Taco Bell. So he calls me on the phone after I get back to Oklahoma City. And he starts to tell me about how he actually has this kind of healthy culture built into Taco Bell's corporate environment. Now, it may not be in their restaurants necessarily, but it's into their corporate environment. And I was telling him that I understood that Oklahoma City was the fast food capital of the world. I'd heard that somewhere. We had the most fast food restaurants per capita of anywhere. And he said, well, that explains it. I said, explains what? And he says, why we have 45 Taco Bells in Oklahoma City. I thought, you gotta be kidding me. I said, well, how many people eat at Taco Bell every day? And I can hear him punching on a computer, and he comes back and goes, over 30,000. I thought, wow. And that opened my eyes to a couple of facts. How am I gonna address this with my citizens? And he and I worked together on a proposal. He actually put a life-size cutout of me in all 45 Taco Bells. With a sign, I'm wearing a jogging suit, and it says, because you can't lose 1 million pounds by yourself. And he pushed what he called the fresco side of the menu. And so when you ordered something with the fresco style, there was no cheese and no sour cream. And the way I approached it was, if 30,000 people a day are doing that, I'm probably not going to stop that. But the message I wanted to send was, even though you've decided to eat at a fast food restaurant, there are still choices to be made about what you're going to eat. And if people are starting to make baby steps in how they're addressing their caloric intake, that's not a bad message. You know, I think too often we send a message about dieting and losing weight that it's all or nothing, that, you know, you have to eat 5 helpings of fresh fruits and vegetables a day. You know, if someone's eating none and they start eating 1, that's a step in the right direction. We should encourage that. The other thing is about programs, and the way I approached it was that almost every government program that tries to take on obesity gathers some leaders around, and they talk about having an obesity effort, and when they leave the room, they've got an exercise program in place. They're going to bike 1,000 miles. They're all going to have a run. And we were we made sure that we addressed food intake, because I believe you do a disservice to the issue when you imply that someone can exercise their way out of obesity. If you're obese, it's almost certain that you need to adjust what you eat and how much you eat. Everyone should exercise. And so I think we should take the exercise equation out of the obesity talk, because the exercise message should go to everyone in the population. But the obese people should admit to themselves that we're going to have to eat differently. It's what you eat and it's how much you eat. And so and sometimes I think that's one of the reasons that our programs seem to have more success, is because we were very upfront, and a lot of people think that these, you know, when you talk about food intake, it gets a little too invasive, and it's a lot easier to tell people to get up and go jog. But if you're really serious about obesity, you've got to send the message that people have to eat differently. And for some reason, that seems to be a tough message for government to want to send to its people.
You've described a really wonderful program where you stepped into an initiative that's had, it sounds like, a really dramatic and positive impact on healthcare in your municipality. And you've done that in an era or a set of years where there have been dramatic changes to the healthcare environment in terms of its finance, operations, and policy at a national level. And I was wondering if you could describe in your mind what are the most salient interactions between what you've seen and done locally and what's going on at a larger scale.
Well, most of the success stories that I saw and witnessed were in collective groups. And so I still think it's important for organizations, and typically that's where somebody works. I think it's important for them to have a wellness program that people can latch onto. And incentives that are built into it, I think, are all good things. I think churches are another component. We had neighborhoods starting to compete against each other in weight loss. And I think when you're trying to do something hard, it's easier to do if you're doing it with somebody else. And in our case, the whole city felt like it was going on a diet. And so there were support groups at every turn. And I really feel like when you're losing weight, it's demoralizing, it's depressing, it's defeating, it's all of those negative things. You feel like it's all about you. And so the support is really, really helpful. And so I think the best way to answer your question is to say it needs to be approached in groups. And typically that's where you work or where you worship or where you live. And you can funnel through and get larger groups of people when you do it that way. And the support group is needed anyway. I don't think we reached a whole lot of people individually. I think mostly it was in groups that wanted to be a part of it.
So, Mayor Cornett, I want to thank you for a fabulous story and for the leadership that you've shown in Oklahoma City around this issue. I think you've set the tone for a fabulous symposium tomorrow, and we're going to be continuing all these conversations. And we have a little token thank you that
how nice.
for you to remember the MHCDS program in Dartmouth College.
I hope it's a bath towel. Thank you. Thank you all very much, and have a great symposium.
I just remembered that Beth asked me to just say that tomorrow's sessions are not here. They're at the Life Sciences Center, and everybody should have a map in your folder that tells you how to get to the Life Sciences Center. So thank you, and have a good evening.